So the moment has happened. Reality has lost its visual layer. Now close your eyes and try to imagine not darkness, but precisely this, the complete absence of visual information. You have just witnessed the first act of global change. But what follows? Our entire civilization is a gigantic, complex mechanism, operating according to predetermined algorithms. And now we are witnessing this mechanism begin to malfunction. Recall the view from the window onto a busy highway. The flow of cars subject to strict rules, traffic lights, lane markings, signs. Now remove all of this. What remains? All that remains is metal, driven by the inertia and will of a person who can no longer see the road. Can you imagine the chaos that arises not from destruction, but from the simple disappearance of one parameter? Cars no longer move. They stop, collide, block passages. Their metal bodies become the first barricades of a new world. They do not burn or explode. They simply silently collide with each other, creating impassable blockages in the city's arteries. Now imagine yourself in the sky, an airplane flying on autopilot. The systems work, but the final stage, landing, requires visual contact, assessment, and decision-making. Without these, the plane becomes an object with no point of return. It continues to move until it runs out of fuel. Ground crews cannot direct it. Airports, those hubs of global communication, fall silent. Their runways become mere long concrete slabs, having lost their purpose. And the final touch to this picture, let's go to street level. A person trying to reach home. His brain sends commands to his legs, but the space around him has become abstract, devoid of landmarks. Every step is a collision with an unidentified object. Every forward movement is a risk. People move, feeling the space in front of them as if in a dream. They bump into each other, into walls, into those very same cars. This isn't panic. It's the slow, inevitable spread of silence and cessation. The connection built on screens and images is broken. Only the voice remains. But who will listen to it when everyone is immersed in their own invisible world? This is the second chapter. The chapter in which movement has given way to stasis and plans to improvisation. Imagine observing the planet from space. You see the familiar outlines of the continents, a spinning globe shrouded in atmosphere. Everything seems as usual, but now we're about to leap through layers of air and find ourselves down there. Prepare to witness a phenomenon that changed everything. We won't show faces, assign blame, or peer into the future. We'll simply capture the moment. So concentrate. What do you see before you right now? The text on the screen, the objects in the room, the light, the shadow. Now imagine this picture not changing. It doesn't fade, doesn't darken, doesn't blur. It simply ceases to be a picture. Light continues to fall on the retina, but the brain no longer receives signals. Nerve impulses carrying information about form, color, and movement are cut off before reaching their destination. It's not like closing your eyes. It's like shutting off one dimension. The world as you knew it continues to exist. It's still there, full of objects, sounds, and smells. But its visible part, the very one that created the illusion of integrity and clarity, disappears. Without a trace. What happens at such a moment to a civilization built on images? A car moving along the highway no longer sees the turn. A pilot no longer sees the landing strip. A surgeon no longer sees the boundaries between tissues. A system fine-tuned over thousands of years fails simultaneously and everywhere. The sky becomes the same as the earth, and the horizon the same as the sky. Everything turns into a homogeneous, endless field without landmarks. And now ask yourself, what will be your first step when the most seemingly reliable and obvious channel of communication with reality disappears? Don't try to imagine feelings. Simply think of the action. The first physical movement in a new invisible world. It is with this action that a new chapter in human history will begin. A chapter written in the dark. So, we've observed a phase of chaos and a phase of survival. But the human body is a system designed for adaptation. The shock subsides and other mechanisms kick in. What happens when the dominant sensory channel is irrevocably disabled? The brain begins to rewire itself. It doesn't create anything new. It merely redistributes resources, amplifying the remaining signals. Close your eyes and listen to the world around you. What do you hear? Now imagine this soundscape as your new map of the area. This is precisely what began to happen. The initial chaotic movements gave way to meaningful actions. People began to use sound as a navigational tool. Imagine walking down the street and tapping a long object in front of you, a stick, a piece of rebar. By the change in sound from the impact, you can determine whether you are in front of an open space, a wall, a metal pole, or a pile of broken glass. This simple method, echolocation, was the first step toward bringing order to the world. Noise transformed from interference into a source of information. At the same time, tactile mapping began to develop. Building walls, corners, pillars, anything within reach became a surface for marking. These markings weren't drawings. They were notches, grooves, and attached rough or smooth materials. Run your hand along a wall and imagine that you can determine your location by the texture of its surface. A smooth patch means you should turn left. A row of jagged edges means a straight path. It's a primitive language, but it works. Spontaneous encounters gave way to cautious interactions based on sound signals. A short shout warned of a presence. A specific tapping rhythm could mean danger or resources here. The world, once a bright picture, was now a complex, constantly updating acoustic and tactile map. It was a return to basics, but at a new technological level. A civilization deprived of eyes began to relearn how to listen and feel, turning chaos into structure, albeit invisible. And now the next stage has arrived. The chaos we've been witnessing has gradually subsided, not because order has been found, but because the energy of the initial shock has dissipated. It has been replaced by a simple basic necessity. Forget high technology and social connections for a moment. Ask yourself, what is most important to an organism deprived of reference points? The answer is obvious: food, water, basic survival. Imagine you're standing in a familiar supermarket. You know where the milk aisle is, where the bread is, but now you can't just walk up to them. Your eyes don't guide you down the aisles. You can't discern the labels. What will you do? You'll follow the smell. You'll follow the touch. You'll rummage through the shelves, sweeping everything in sight, knocking over packages, trying to determine by touch whether what you're holding is a can of preserves or a pack of laundry detergent. That's exactly what's happening. Stores and warehouses became the scene of a slow, methodical looting, where people moved like mollusks, relying on the tentacles of hearing and touch. It wasn't an organized pogrom, but rather a blind harvest. Hands bumped into objects, the brain trying to match tactile sensations with memories. Someone would carry off a box of cereal, another a bottle of detergent. The efficiency of such harvesting was extremely low. Most of the food ended up crushed, trampled, or mixed into a homogeneous mass on the floor. Conflicts arose not from malicious intent, but from literal collisions. Two people, following the same sound or smell, would collide at a shelf. Their hands would grab the same object. A struggle would ensue. Without eye contact, without the ability to assess the other person's intentions, this confrontation was resolved by brute force. A blow, a push, a fall, and the winner took the trophy. The loser crawled on, probing the space in search of other prey. This wasn't a war of all against all. It was a primitive biological competition for resources in a situation where all social conventions had ceased to function. Civilization at this stage reverted to its most ancient pre-visual code. Find food, avoid threat, continue to exist. Everything else faded into the background. In these dark spaces filled with unidentifiable noises and smells, a new, brutal logic of existence was taking shape. Now let's consider the astonishing phenomenon of perestroika. We've seen how individual people adapted to new conditions. But what happens to the machine? To the gigantic production complexes that were built for a world where an operator stares at a screen and a worker inspects a visual defect? Has everything stopped? No, industry hasn't disappeared. It's begun to mutate. Try to imagine a factory floor. It used to be filled with light and the movement of machinery monitored by the eyes. Now imagine the same floor plunged into silence, broken only by a rhythmic hum. How can you make machines work for someone who can't see them? The answer lies in the tactile interface. Imagine a control panel. It used to have buttons and lights. Now every button, every lever has unique raised markings. Not just a touch point, but a complex pattern recognizable by the fingertips. A circle with notches means the conveyor is running. A triangle means it's stopped. A hexagon means emergency mode. The control panel became a book written in Braille, but for machine commands. This didn't require the invention of new technologies. It required a rethinking of the old approach. But what to do with information that is fundamentally visual? For example, readings from a dial gauge or color indicators. Here, conversion technologies came to the rescue. Devices emerged, a kind of translator. They read light signals, illumination levels, or color, and converted them into vibrations of varying intensity and frequency. Imagine holding such a device in your hand. It makes no sound. It pulsates. A steady, frequent pulsation is normal. Intermittent, infrequent pulsation is abnormal. Strong, constant vibration is a malfunction. Your skin, your nerve endings, become the receiver of the information previously processed by the eye. So industry didn't stop. It switched to a different mode of interaction. The assembly lines continued to move, churning out products adapted to the new world. Clothing with enhanced tactile cues, packaging with raised pictograms, tools with an offset center of gravity for improved tactile perception. It was a quiet, large-scale revolution in touch. The world of machines learned to speak to humans in the language of vibrations and reliefs. Now consider humanity's most important tool. Not a hammer or an engine, but a means of communicating complex ideas. Language. How did our civilization communicate? Through writing, through images, through film. All of this was built on the ability to see. Now imagine that this gigantic archive of human thought, its entire culture and knowledge, was suddenly locked away. The key to this lock, sight, was lost. What happens to the collective mind when it loses its visual memory? It seeks new paths. The first and most obvious solution was a return to oral tradition, but not to primitive cries, but to structured speech. Radio, once considered obsolete, instantly returned as a primary channel. Imagine the airwaves not filled with music, but densely populated with voices. Voices dictate survival instructions. Voices read technical manuals. Voices recount the contents of books, describe drawings and diagrams in words. It is a gigantic, continuous audio tape to which all of society is connected. Knowledge that was once stored on shelves is now broadcast over the airwaves. But what about books? Physical objects filled with illegible symbols. Here, a system invented long ago but now mainstream came to the rescue. Braille. Thousands of hands began the work of converting paper pages into raised dot font. Imagine assembly lines that don't print, but extrude, where the fingertip is the primary quality controller. Every book, every instruction manual, every important document takes on a new form, a form that can be read in the dark. Libraries are turning into archives of tactile manuscripts. And finally, a new format is emerging, the audiobook. Not in our understanding of entertainment, but as the only way to access fiction. Actors, announcers, and simply people with clear speech are becoming key figures in culture. They don't simply read text, they become the voice of a lost visual culture, translators from the language of images to the language of pure sound. Thus, communication did not die. It had narrowed to two channels, sound and touch, but such a powerful flow of information flowed through them that civilization was able to preserve the continuity of knowledge. It was a return to its roots on a new technological foundation. Now let's look at the planet itself. Not its natural environment, but its second skin, the infrastructure created by humanity. Cities, roads, buildings, all of this was designed for visual perception. Wide avenues designed for views, aesthetically pleasing facades, complex transportation hubs. All of this suddenly lost its original meaning. What happens to a city when it ceases to be visible? It begins to rebuild itself from within, obeying a new logic. Imagine a street. You used to walk along the sidewalk, guided by storefronts, signs, and traffic lights. Now this space has become an acoustic corridor. The walls of buildings, once mere boundaries, have become active navigation elements. They are equipped with sound beacons, devices emitting constant low-frequency hums, different for each block. By following a certain tone, you could find your way to the water, to a food warehouse, to a residential area. The city began to sound, and its sound became its map. Architecture also changed its function. The primary consideration was no longer how a building looked, but how it felt. Materials with different textures began to be used in construction. The approach to the main entrance might be paved with smooth stone, then replaced by rough cobblestone signaling a staircase. Walls began to feel like tactile maps, with a protrusion denoting one type of room and a depression another. Windows, no longer serving their intended purpose, were often bricked up, turning the outer walls into continuous information panels for the hands. But the most radical transformation was the development of underground spaces. The above-ground world, with its unpredictable weather, accumulated debris, and complex acoustics, was too chaotic. Subway tunnels and specially dug passages became a new, safe transportation system. Imagine a network of underground corridors with continuous guide ropes stretched along the walls. By moving along such a tightrope, a person could traverse the entire city without fear of collision or fall. It was an ideal, predictable environment, created for creatures deprived of sight. Above-ground cities gradually turned into ruins, a backdrop, while real life retreated underground, into the realm of tactile landmarks and echoes. Now let's consider how the very fabric of society changed. All professions, the entire social hierarchy, were built around specific skills. The vast majority of these skills directly or indirectly depended on vision. What happens when this foundation disappears? Imagine a surgeon, an architect, a driver, a watchmaker. Their skills, honed over years, suddenly lose their practical value. The question arises, what is valuable now? What abilities become the new social capital? The answer lies in what could not be automated or digitized. Skills previously considered secondary came to the forefront. Memory, hearing, the ability to perform complex mental calculations, the ability to navigate in space using only acoustic and tactile cues. People with perfect pitch could pinpoint the location of an object by the slightest echo. Those with phenomenal memories became living maps and encyclopedias. Mental accountants could conduct complex accounting operations without papers or screens. The education system underwent a total transformation. Imagine a classroom. There are no desks, textbooks, or chalkboards. A group of people sits in silence, listening to the teacher's voice. Instruction was reduced to audio lectures and oral exams. Students were expected to memorize vast amounts of information by ear, not read, from the laws of physics to historical dates. Practical skills were developed exclusively through tactile interaction with objects. Engineers were taught to assemble and disassemble mechanisms blindfolded, relying solely on their sense of touch and manual memory. Thus, a global revaluation of human potential occurred. Talents that had often remained in the shadows in the old world became the foundation of a new elite. Society was structured not around the possession of visual information, but around the ability to process, store, and transmit it in new, non-visual formats. This was a painful but inevitable evolutionary leap that redistributed roles and statuses, creating a new hierarchy based on the power of hearing, memory, and touch. So, we reach the final point of our observation. Civilization has undergone shock, adaptation, and restructuring. Now let us evaluate the outcome. What remains of a world once filled with images? Has culture disappeared? No. It has been subjected to a brutal yet natural selection. All forms of art, whose existence was inextricably linked to visual perception, have vanished into oblivion. Painting, graphics, cinema, architecture as art, all have become archaeological artifacts, concepts without parallel in the new reality. But what has filled the vacated space? Music, sculpture, and oral tradition have become the dominant forms of creativity. Imagine that instead of an art gallery, you find yourself in a room where the exhibits can only be touched. Sculpture, previously a complement to architecture, has become the primary plastic art. Tactile artists created complex compositions designed to be explored by hand, where the texture, temperature of the material, and form conveyed complex meanings previously accessible only to the eye. Music ceased to be mere entertainment. It became a language, a means of conveying history, emotional states, even technical information. Entire symphonies arose, encoding instructions for assembling mechanisms or route descriptions. And finally, oral tradition. Epics, sagas, and ballads, forms once considered archaic, reclaimed their dominant role. Storytellers, possessing a unique memory and voice, became the guardians not only of culture, but also of applied knowledge. Long rhythmic poems could encode the laws of physics, the principles of medicine, and historical chronicles. Civilization stabilized. It was neither better nor worse than its predecessor. It was different. It functioned on a different sensory basis, where hearing, touch, and memory created a new, stable balance. It was a world that had learned to get by without the seemingly most essential things, a world that survived by ceasing to be visible.